Joining us now from London is Chris Roebuck. He's the visiting Professor of Transformational Leadership at Cass Business Scholl. Chris, welcome as ever to Money Talks. Do Uber's troubles mean that the entire sharing economy's business model is now in trouble?
I think Uber has its own problems that are somewhat special. You know, there are questions about the gig economy. Governments are now beginning to realise that it might not be as good for them as they thought. Employees are beginning to think the same. Suggestions that perhaps less than 20% of people in the gig economy want to be in the gig economy. In terms of Uber and the taxi issues, Taxify is being hit with the same issues in Europe as Uber. So there is that fundamental issue of regulation around the world. Are you an app? Are you a taxi provider and therefore subject to regulation? But Uber, with the 250 sexual harassment claims, having to pull in, senior people to do an inquiry, the CEO leaving, a nice video of the CEO haranguing a driver that went viral. Yeah, they have their own issues.
But how does a company in Uber's position deal with such a major shift in the regulatory framework that's gone against it? In practical terms, how do you, if you're a company leader, how do you do that?
I think Uber has to, and indeed the other people, and not just taxi firms who get into this position with regulators, they have to do a judgment in terms of how heavy is the regulation, and therefore what additional costs is the regulation within that jurisdiction going to put upon the organisation versus their profits. And if it's going to be fairly light touch in terms of, for example, you need to do criminal record checks of your drivers, which is reasonably quick and simple with databases, then it's not a major cost. So they can meet the requirements of the regulator very easily. However, if it then moves on to, OK, fine, you're going to have to make sure that your drivers don't exceed the legal hours that other taxi drivers are limited to by putting timers in the cars and checking they don't do that for the safety of passengers and everybody else, then that becomes more onerous. So I think it's a negotiation, to be blunt, between Uber and Taxify and indeed other taxi companies, or apps as they like to be called, in those different jurisdictions to say, OK, what do you want us to do? If we do what you want us to do, is it going to mean that we still have a viable business model in this market?
You raised an interesting point earlier on, Chris, where you said that not many people who work in the gig economy actually want to be in the gig economy. Has the rise of the sharing economy, do you think, contributed to the widening in income inequalities that we've seen around the world? And if so, is that right that companies, is it right that companies get regulated to the extent that those inequalities get minimized?
Yeah, there's a number of issues there. I think what happened was the gig economy, to be blunt, sneaked up somewhat in terms of governments and regulators, and it all built up momentum from the commercial perspective, because utilising the gig economy practices, zero-hour contracts, etc., you can very quickly make more money as an organisation. Now, what's now happening is that governments are saying, yeah, OK, hang on, but if you're saying these people aren't employees, you aren't paying us your employee tax contributions. So we're having to pick up the tab for these so-called self-employed people when you are effectively perhaps employing them. So governments are beginning to ask questions about this. It also has had the effect of, to be blunt, pushing down wages. Employees and trade unions are having questions about this. And there is some evidence that as it is pushing down wages, it is creating a group of people within society that have low wages and are never able to get out of it. For example, evidence in UK that consumer debt that is held by normal working people, particularly those on 0 hours contract, is such that their incomes are now less than the consumer debt interest they have. So they are effectively trapped within a cycle of debt that they cannot get out of ever, whereas those people who are not on the gig economy can potentially move up. So I think there are fundamental questions about if the gig economy is used in a positive and respectful way by employers for employees, then it's OK.
Right.
If it's as a means to exploit, then I think governments have to regulate.
Right. Chris Roebuck, on some of the most important issues of our time. Thank you very much indeed.